Shut up and sit down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of More Content Talk. That's the only show that cuts through the glam, the glitz, and all the bullshit to bring you the truthiest news that we can find. Well, as I'm sitting here, ladies, gents, and otherwise, theys and thems, I have descended into madness. Not quite literally, not yet. And actually, I shouldn't say not yet because I've already been there and left that area. So that's already been done, long since done. I'm way ahead of you on that. Don't worry about that at all. No, I'm not crazy at all. But you feel a little nuts when you look into the world of YouTube influencers. When you really start to get into influencers in general and you study what goes on behind the scenes, you're really introduced to a kind of I don't know, it's like an alternate reality almost, where you see that it's really nothing more than reality television, but just online. It's reality internet. So you're pretending to know this person, essentially, and you think you know this person. Maybe some of you think that the vast majority of influencers are sincere, and perhaps they are, but I'm noticing more and more that even when the influencers are sincere, which in my particular experience has been, a little rare, you come across the rare sincere influencer, but apart from that, you get a lot of kind of really dark sides of reality that you didn't know existed when you actually analyze the YouTube influencers themselves. For example, if you get into the various dieting sites, I've uncovered a few instances now where people had eating disorders who were using these extreme kind of diets, whether it was kind of fad diets, or whether it was diets that have scientific proof, even like veganism, vegetarianism. People are basically using clean and healthy eating lifestyles. You see the term lifestyle a lot used, to mask their various eating disorders. Sometimes it's anorexia, sometimes it's bulimia, sometimes it's both, and sometimes it's things like orthorexia, which is a rare form of eating disorder that specifically causes one to reject foods that are not what the victim of the ailment considers clean food. So it's interesting when looking at these people. Perhaps they're not on the diets that they're on. There have been some instances where people have been caught on other diets. So that's just a lie, and those are your particular scam artists. You're the ones you expect to find in every trade. But there's also people who seem to be kind of suffering silently behind the camera. And if you remember the heartbreak that you felt with people like Robin Williams, various celebrities, Prince, who could have been helped in some way had they maybe communicated the need for that. And so it's important not only to expose scam artists. That's not, I don't want to come off as someone who's just out to like be a killjoy. It's not just about that for me. It's about much more than that. It's about, you can help celebrities and famous people too. Sometimes they're suffering, and some of the stuff, the bad stuff I'm talking about, Hollywood and just fame in general and money in general, is to ground you and help you remember that, yeah, maybe these people have all that stuff, but maybe their drive to get to that level of fame and fortune was something that came from a dark place. And if that's the case, if their very motivation for starting the channel was done kind of in this dark kind of depressed state, is what they're doing, what's giving you pleasure, keeping them in that kind of dark, depressed state? And that's a very real concern. And you also get into people who seek adulation, and how they kind of have particular complexes sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, where they need that adulation to feel loved. And then if they feel that they're not getting it, or it's not at the right level or whatever, perhaps they'll descend into madness and harm themselves and others. I just came across a story of one of the original popular YouTubers. I think his name was like Anime Man or something like that. But this was a younger guy he had started off doing skits, sometimes even featuring his family. And the skits didn't really work out. Skits never do that great on YouTube in general. I mean, you need so much technical crap nowadays. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. You pretty much have to, have like, I don't know, like a 250,000 handy just to, get like the millions of views that you need to make money. So I don't even put my videos up on YouTube to make money. I just put them up there so I have a record, and there's other reasons. But who knows? Maybe someday they'll get popular, but I don't really expect much, because like I said, it's such a high tech, swanky scene now. But in the early days of YouTube, you didn't need all that shit, and you could maybe get yourself a legitimate career, as long as you had something that people liked to talk about, that they were interested in. And this kid wasn't even necessarily an entertainer. He wasn't that entertaining. I watched some of his stuff. It was all right. It was mostly he had found a niche, and he had found people, anime fans who liked his stuff, right? And so they watch it, and he got to, millions of views in the early days of YouTube, which is a big deal back then. It's not so much of a big deal now, but in the early days it was. And anyway, this kid, this whole time he's doing all this wonderful stuff. He's leading this double life. I mean, he was unhappy at home, and unhappy with the criticisms of his dad and his family. And he had gone into a really dark place. I think he used to get into really bad arguments with his father, which is never a good sign. And he didn't appreciate the criticism. His dad would, call him kind of like a failure. That's what he said. I wasn't there at the time, but this is what this kid is saying about his dad, is that he implied that he's a failure because he was, different. He didn't want to, go work at McDonald's, and that's what parents want for children. They want them to go and just suffer and just find some miserable job. But he didn't want that, so he had a kind of artsy little thing, and the dad didn't respond to it very well, and that can be very devastating for a child. I've kind of been there. I never wanted to kill my father. I never thought about that, but that's what this kid started fantasizing about doing. He started fantasizing about killing his dad and his family, and eventually he carried out the gruesome act. He murdered his mom first, and then later, when he was confessing to the crime, he was like, well, I had already murdered my mom, and there's no way I could take that back, so I just killed them too. And so obviously this kid was very disturbed, and wasn't receiving any kind of attention that he needed, which perhaps could have prevented this from happening. I mean, some sort of psychiatric intervention or something, because obviously this comes from a very dark place. But the point is this kid's getting millions of views on YouTube, and the irony of all of it is that it was kind of predictable, because he started posting all these videos about guns, and he became very obsessed with guns toward the last year or two of his YouTube career. And so it's kind of predictable. It followed the same MO as a lot of extremists. This kid wasn't necessarily a religious extremist or a political extremist, but just a normal person who was suffering and in despair. And as I've talked about, despair can lie to you and convince you that you need to do things that you'd necessarily absolutely don't need to do. And so that's just another example of the miserable lives that sometimes people with fame lead. It makes you wonder why people are striving so quickly toward it. Perhaps people are, in a sense, punishing themselves. I mean, many of the people who go into these careers know that the schedules are demanding. They know that they're going to have all these rigorous kind of conversations online that involve, being maybe even threatened from time to time or stalked, or so there's all kinds of pressures behind this. If you look at another case where the influencer wasn't necessarily bad, it's a very popular female influencer who would get stalked by someone who goes by the name of Unicorn Chaser or something like that. This person has been eerily stalking this woman. She's basically living in fear now because of this stalker. The police refuse to do anything about it because he hasn't, physically harmed her, and that's basically what it takes to get recognition. I mean, file the injunction, but the guy doesn't have any place of residence, and it's almost impossible to file injunctions and restraining orders against people who don't have place of residence, and obviously stalkers take advantage of that. When he was arrested for harassing her, he had given his home address as a volcano in Mexico, so no one even knows where this person lives, but he's stalking this woman who is a popular online influencer, and I don't recall her name, but you can look up the story online and you'll find that it's true. So this is just 3 examples of how this descends into madness. But I think the one that takes the cake is, of course, the YouTube mom, the famed woman who died in prison after abusing her children very grossly and atrociously in ways that you would think you would only hear about on some after-school special. I mean, these kids were covered with feces at one point. There were cuts, and there were feces in the cuts. That was one of the reports from the school to the Arizona Child Protective Services Agency, which refused to do anything on multiple occasions. I believe it was 10 occasions that they refused to step in. That was recently released on the YouTube mom story. That's new news. So you had multiple accounts, multiple graphic accounts. You have confessions from the children of, beatings. You have bruises, pictures of bruises. You have children who were, almost in tears talking about this abuse, talking about being locked in closets. You have records of the school stepping in and seeing the children coming to school disheveled, and all the signs of neglect that you could possibly want. You have in this case. You have the physical evidence of abuse and neglect, and still the CPS did nothing. And I think it's no coincidence that this woman had this YouTube channel and had, I don't know, something ridiculous, 10 million followers at one point or something like that, and filming in this green room. And the green room she's filming these videos in, she's locking the kids in the green room at night. She's leaving them in there sometimes for days without feeding them. One of the girls had detailed that she had vomited because she was so hungry at one point. She'd leave them in there with diapers, and they would just have to go to the bathroom on themselves, and then sometimes not with no diapers at all. And so these kids would piled one on top of each other basically in a room. There's like 5 of them or 3 or something like that in a room, in this green room where they're filming all this wonderful, fancy fantasy crap. And that's what I tell you. You see, don't get too caught up with fantasy, because fantasy requires work, and work is never fun for the people involved. Sure, all the people come out and they do the interview, and they say how wonderful it is to do this job. The vast majority of them say this, unless they're honest. But the reality is that it takes a lot of work, and when kids are involved, kids and animals both, they don't naturally do work. Okay, that's not a thing that they do. That's something that human adults do. We see the value in that because we like to punish ourselves. Children don't like that shit, and so in order to get your little kids movies, and in order to get your little fantasy YouTube channels, what you have to do if you really want to make a lot of money, is be abusive. And that's why you'll never see any kids on any of my channels, because I what do you want me to do? You want me to sit here and yell at this kid? So you have any idea what goes into filming, especially when you're moving? This right here, not much, because it's a fixed camera and it's just pointing at me. I'm not getting multiple angles. But let's say, I film a scene, right? And I got to walk over there, back over here, and then over there. I'm going to have to move that camera around. I'm going to have to take 3 different, maybe even 4 different angles of that shot. It's going to be extremely boring. I'm going to need to stand in the same place. So some guy's or whatever is going to have to go get a light because it's not in the right place. You're standing around in film for probably like 3 hours to get one shot sometimes. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's one of the reasons I never really got into film. I don't want to fucking stand there all day. I don't have time for that shit. It's one of the reasons I got in the theater. You stand less, wait less. But even then there's waiting. But what I'm telling you is that this stuff is not possible for kids to do without there being some form of harm involved, some form of abusive verbal language, some form of neglect. Sometimes these kids got to go to the bathroom at inconvenient times. They're forced to stay there, just like I demonstrated in the horrible story about the YouTube mom. So just, really be conscious of that and remember that that's the price of not living in the real world, is that people get hurt when you don't live in the real world. And that's the price. And you have to pay it. It's just the truth. And I don't know how many more of these abuse cases have to come out before you realize that it's not just an act. It can be harmful to people. And I don't know if that's worth your entertainment. That's up to you. But my advice to you is really, research people. See what they're up to. Are they really presenting something that's possible in the real world? Because if they are, maybe that has more value. I don't know. But we have to stop fooling ourselves and just taking people on face value and saying, oh, well, that's who they are. Because, if it's on the fucking computer, the TV or whatever, it's a fucking act. I can be real this way, just doing this by myself, right? I don't have any fancy camera work or anything. But as soon as you see all this fancy camera work and all that shit, you got to start asking the question, is this all this polish because the shoe is crap? Or is it really legit? Is it a good shoe? You got to ask yourself that. All right, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I know that I have. I like to bring you the truth. If you support truth, you can support us. We have a support link at the bottom of our episodes where you can become a supporter of More Content Talk so that we can keep bringing you episodes. You can also help us out just by sharing the episodes with your friends. Having them give a listen to it. Maybe if they want to, they can write a review. That's up to you. You can also check us out at YouTube. That helps us out at More Content Talk, as well as TikTok at More Content Talk. That also helps us out if you follow us. And Instagram at More Content Talk. You can follow us on Instagram. We'd really appreciate it. You can also check us out at More_Content PLS at Twitter. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful night. And remember, when life gets you down, you can always laugh at something else. Farewell, folks.